That morning, the sky was clear and blue, with just a few white clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. I stood at a distance watching the newly built fountain area, where the neighborhood and HOA members had gathered for the grand opening. The entire neighborhood was excited, hoping this moment would symbolize a thriving, prosperous community. People were chatting happily, and Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, stood there with a smug smile, proud of the achievement she had created. As Karen stepped up to the podium to press the button to start the fountain, I watched from afar. She smiled brightly, facing the crowd, ready to flaunt the fountain she had built. But as soon as the button was pressed, something no one expected happened. Instead of a stream of clear water, a foul yellow-brown water burst out, spraying everywhere across the plaza. The dirty water hit everyone nearby, especially Karen and the HOA members. Her face turned pale as she watched the disaster unfold. Dirty water splashed all over people, causing the atmosphere to turn chaotic. The residents began shouting frantically, looking for clean water to wash off the stains. What was supposed to be a proud moment for Karen turned into a disaster beyond repair. And I, standing quietly in the crowd, knew that this was just the beginning. I wasn't just here to ruin today. I wanted Karen and the entire HOA to see that every act of corruption and deceit would come with a price. Karen Whitmore is a powerful woman, always appearing confident, responsible, and determined in every situation. As the HOA president, she commands respect and admiration from everyone around her, always making decisions that she claims are for the greater good of the community. However, beneath this perfect facade lies a dark conspiracy. Karen doesn't just manage the HOA. She exploits her position to manipulate every decision, especially those related to large projects and residents' fees. The fountain project she proposed wasn't just a community initiative. It was the first step in a scheme to siphon money from residents under the guise of water fees for the HOA. After I discovered the strange underground pipe connected to my water system, I decided to confront Karen about using my water supply without my permission. I stood in front of her, my voice tense. "Karen, who do you think you are installing a water pipe on my property without consulting me?" Karen sat behind the large desk in the HOA office, her face still holding that cold, practiced smile. She didn't appear worried at all. "We're working for the greater good of the community, Caleb. You can't just reject everything for your own personal gain," she replied, calm, but laced with a hint of challenge. Her answer didn't make me back down, but it did make me realize something important. Karen wasn't just installing a pipe for the fountain. She had secretly built a system where water from my house would be used to supply the fountain. Behind that, there was a plan for corruption. Residents would pay water bills to the HOA, but instead of using clean water, they were being misled into thinking the fountain was supplied with clean water, while in reality, it was water from my property, and I would never see a cent of that money. That was when I understood. Everything Karen was doing wasn't for the community. It was for her own personal benefit and the benefit of the people in the HOA. The letters started piling up, sent by the HOA, demanding that I comply with regulations I had never been informed about. Each letter contained threats about new rules I wasn't even aware of. First, they asked me to change certain areas of my property to align with the community's beautification plan. Then they demanded I modify the way I was renovating my house, with no clear reason, just a vague statement that it needed to meet community standards. All these requests were ambiguous and lacked a valid foundation, but they carried an unmistakable tone of coercion, forcing me to comply. One day I decided I couldn't stay silent any longer. I protested and requested a face-to-face meeting to clarify these demands. Instead of coming to meet me, Karen instructed one of the HOA members to come to my house and threaten me with the need to sign a community improvement agreement. "If you don't sign, I'll show you the consequences," Karen's voice echoed in my ear through the phone, filled with subtle intimidation and pressure. She was making it clear that I had no choice but to agree. I refused to sign the agreement, standing firm in my demand for a clear explanation. I thought this issue would end right there, but I was wrong. Immediately after my refusal, I received an official warning from the HOA, demanding that I fix all violations I didn't even know I had committed. They threatened that if I didn't comply, they would take more severe measures to force my hand, and they even mentioned the possibility of legal action for violating community rules. That was when I started realizing that these weren't just unreasonable demands from the HOA. There was a much bigger scheme at play, one that Karen and the HOA members were executing to abuse their power for personal gain. It wasn't long before I started noticing the signs of encroachment. At first, it was subtle, small changes to the neighborhood I had always known so well. Then the construction started. Heavy equipment began showing up in places it shouldn't have been, and workers started digging where no one had authorized them to. The first hint that something was wrong came when I saw workers near the boundary of my property digging what looked like a trench, but when I asked them, they told me nothing about the project. As the days passed, more and more evidence of this illicit construction appeared. One morning I saw a crew working near my land, cutting through the earth at a spot where I had never given permission for any digging or building. They were laying pipes, and at first I thought they might be working on public infrastructure. But then I recognized the unmistakable blueprints of an irrigation system, something entirely unrelated to what should have been going on. My suspicions only grew when I saw the name of the construction company involved, Precision Landscape LLC. I recognized the name immediately. It had come up in a few HOA meetings I hadn't attended, but it didn't quite stick out at the time. Now, everything about it felt off. I started digging into the company's records and the HOA's documents. What I found sent a chill down my spine. There in the HOA's official records was a contract signed between the HOA and Precision Landscape LLC, clearly outlining that part of my land, yes, my property was going to be developed for the HOA's latest project. The contract didn't just mention public land, nor did it talk about any easement. No, it specifically stated that they intended to use a section of my property for what they called a landscaping improvement project. The details were vague, but there was no denying it. The HOA under Karen's leadership was planning to use my land for its own benefit without even consulting me. This wasn't just a small mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. It was a power grab, plain and simple. And Karen, the very person I had trusted as the president of the HOA, was orchestrating the whole thing. She had every intention of making my property part of the HOA's plan to improve the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal without my consent. My heart pounded as I read through the details. They hadn't just violated my property, they had done so under the cover of legal documents and the power of the HOA. To top it all off, the construction company wasn't just any random contractor. Precision Landscape LLC was tied directly to Karen. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I could feel the weight of the conspiracy beginning to form. There was no question in my mind anymore that this wasn't just about landscaping or water projects. This was about control, about Karen using her position to take what wasn't hers and line her own pockets while everyone else was in the dark. I had to confront Karen. I couldn't let this go any further, but I knew she wouldn't make it easy. So I made my way to the HOA office the next day. As usual, Karen was there sitting behind her desk with that calm, self-assured look on her face that made everyone else around her believe she had everything under control. She greeted me with her usual practiced smile. "Caleb, what brings you here today?" she asked, not even bothering to look up from the papers on her desk. "Karen," I started, my voice tense, "I need to know why you've been allowing construction crews to dig on my land without my permission. There's no way in hell I'm going to stand by while you just take what's mine." Karen's expression didn't change. She slowly put down her pen, met my eyes, and then leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You're overreacting, Caleb. The work is part of the community's new initiative. It's for the greater good. We need to make improvements, and your land is simply in the way. This is for the benefit of everyone. Surely you can understand that." Her words felt like a slap in the face. I clenched my fists at my sides. "You're taking my land for your improvements, without even asking me. What part of no don't you understand? This is my property, Karen. You don't have the right to do whatever you want with it." She gave me that cold, knowing smile. "We don't need to waste time arguing, Caleb. This decision has been made, and you're going to have to live with it. After all, this is what's best for the community." Her arrogance was palpable, and for a moment I felt a surge of anger, but I held it back. I couldn't let her get the best of me. "I don't care what you think is best for the community," I shot back. "This is my land, and you have no right to use it for anything you want. Not without my permission." She didn't even flinch. "I think you'll find, Caleb, that our board is very united on this matter. You're just one voice against many, and frankly, we've already made the decision." I stood there for a moment, my blood boiling, but I knew I had to keep my composure. "This isn't over, Karen. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what's really going on here. You can't just push people around because you think you can." Karen didn't seem concerned by my threat. She simply nodded, her smile never faltering. "We'll see how far that gets you," she said dismissively. I turned on my heel and walked out, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I knew now that I had to act quickly. I couldn't let Karen and the HOA get away with this, but I needed more evidence. I would start gathering everything I could, contracts, records, even testimonies from the workers on the site. I had to expose Karen for what she really was, a power-hungry, manipulative liar. But it wasn't just about exposing her anymore. It was about taking back control of my land and making sure this kind of thing never happened again. I couldn't let her walk all over me, and I certainly couldn't let her get away with stealing from the community like this. I had to fight back, and this time, I wasn't going to back down. As the initial anger started to subside, I became determined to dig deeper. I couldn't let this slide. I spent hours digging through public records, looking for any documentation related to the pipe installation and anything the HOA might have done on my property. What I found was far more shocking than I ever expected. It wasn't just a single pipe that had been installed as I had originally thought. There was a much larger underground system built to channel water, not only from my property, but from other areas as well, directly into the fountain. These pipes ran through parts of my land that I wasn't aware of, crossing areas where no one had ever notified me about any plans. Everything seemed to have been set up a long time ago, and I was the only one left in the dark about it. My frustration grew as I realized that this wasn't just a minor oversight, it was a deliberate action. It wasn't only the pipes they installed, but the whole system was designed to divert water from my property to feed the fountain, all without my knowledge or consent. And the worst part, this wasn't just some random company doing this work. The company behind the operation was Precision Landscape LLC, a name that immediately rang a bell. I dug deeper into the company's records and HOA documents, and what I uncovered made my blood run cold. Precision Landscape LLC wasn't just any random contractor. It was a company directly linked to Karen. The owner of the company was Ronald Whitmore, Karen's brother-in-law. This revelation made it all too clear. Karen had orchestrated the whole thing using her position in the HOA to arrange for her family's business to profit off my land without my knowledge or consent. But the real shock came when I discovered that Karen wasn't just using her position to take my land, she was also making me pay for it. The invoices I uncovered from Precision Landscape LLC were alarming. The HOA had paid for the construction of the water system through their funds, but one particular line caught my eye. The costs for the water system installation were far higher than they should have been, and I realized that Karen had been charging me for a portion of the work, something I never knew about. Not only was she taking from me without asking, but she was also indirectly making me foot the bill for her family's business. It was a double betrayal, one in which I was the unwitting accomplice. This was too much. I had to do something about it. I couldn't let this go any longer, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of the community. I couldn't stand by while Karen continued to profit off my land and use her position to deceive and manipulate everyone around her. I began to plan my next steps, and this time I was determined to strike back legally and forcefully. First, I knew I had to collect all the evidence I could. I gathered copies of the contract between the HOA and Precision Landscape LLC, the invoices related to the construction work documents showing the payment made to the company, and all the legal paperwork I could find. Each piece of evidence confirmed my suspicions. Karen had used her power in the HOA to manipulate the entire system for her family's benefit. I wasn't just dealing with a simple case of property theft. This was corporate fraud, collusion, and financial mismanagement on a grand scale. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in property rights. After going through everything with me, he was visibly shocked. "Caleb, what you have here goes beyond simple trespassing," he said. "You have a strong case for both civil damages and a potential criminal investigation. This is fraud, embezzlement, and conflict of interest violations all rolled into one. If you want, we could file a lawsuit against Karen personally and the HOA for abusing its powers." His words gave me a sense of clarity. This wasn't just a fight over a piece of land anymore. It was about holding Karen accountable for her actions. She had crossed a line, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. With the lawyer's advice in mind, I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let Karen continue with her schemes, thinking she could get away with everything. I started preparing for the legal battle, but I wasn't going to stop there. I wanted to expose Karen's corruption to the entire community. It wasn't just about winning in court, it was about making sure that everyone knew what she had done. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen had carefully calculated every move she made. She had manipulated everyone around her, including me. She thought she could keep everything under wraps, but I had the evidence now, and I was going to use it. It was time to show the truth to the people she had been deceiving for so long. But I wasn't just going to file a lawsuit and wait. I knew I had to take action in a way that would ensure Karen couldn't wiggle her way out of this. I wasn't going to give her the chance to bury the truth or manipulate the narrative again. She was about to get a dose of her own medicine. Every step I took from here on out would be a calculated move to make sure Karen paid for her actions, and to make sure that the community would never have to endure this kind of manipulation again. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about stopping Karen and her abuse of power. and I was ready to make sure she couldn't escape it. After gathering all the evidence I could, I knew I couldn't take this on by myself. Karen and her group had manipulated everything in this neighborhood for far too long, and it was time for the authorities to intervene. I started reaching out to the appropriate agencies, building inspectors, financial auditors, and local law enforcement. It was no longer just about proving my point to Karen. It was about making sure she could no longer hide behind her power and manipulation. The community needed to know the truth about what had been happening behind the scenes. But as I was preparing to take the next steps, Karen found out. She learned that I was starting to bring everything to light, and things began to escalate quickly. I received a call from her one night, her voice cold and sharp-laced with a thinly veiled threat. "Caleb," Karen said, her tone deliberately calm, though I could hear the tension behind it. "I think you've gone too far now. If you continue with this, I will be forced to sue you for defamation and harassment." I could feel the weight of her words, but I didn't flinch. My response was measured and calm. "Go ahead, Karen. Try it. I'm not afraid of you anymore. What are you going to do? I'm just doing what's right." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the frustration building up inside her. She realized that the evidence I had was irrefutable, and that her web of lies and manipulation was starting to unravel. But this only made me more determined. Karen had abused her power for so long, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. I wasn't going to let her continue her schemes, not when I had the chance to stop it. After that phone call, I didn't hesitate for a second. I kept going. I needed to make sure I had every possible piece of evidence to expose her. I reached out to more witnesses, people who had worked with Karen or knew about the shady financial dealings that had been taking place behind the HOA's closed doors. Some people were too afraid to speak up, but others, including former employees of the HOA, were willing to share what they knew. Their testimonies were invaluable, shedding light on the deeper layers of corruption that had been festering under Karen's leadership. Once I had gathered everything I needed, I contacted my lawyer and instructed him to prepare for a lawsuit. I knew I had enough material to make a compelling case. He reviewed the documents and immediately recognized the severity of the situation. "Caleb, you've got a strong case here. You can't just go after Karen. You need to bring the authorities in on this," he said. "There's enough evidence for criminal investigation, fraud, and abuse of power. We need to involve the authorities and make sure this isn't swept under the rug." With that confirmation, I knew I was on the right track. The investigation had to go public, and I needed the full weight of the law behind me. So we decided to file a formal complaint with the local authorities. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about making sure her actions were scrutinized and that the entire neighborhood knew how deep her corruption ran. But of course, Karen wasn't going to just let things unfold without a fight. Once she found out that I had gone public with the investigation, she did everything in her power to stop it. I learned through my sources that Karen had begun contacting the authorities directly, trying to discredit me and pressure them not to pursue the investigation. She claimed I was making up lies and falsely accusing her. She told them that I was harassing her and that there was no evidence to back up my claims. Karen, the woman who had been manipulating everything behind closed doors, was now using every ounce of her influence to bury the truth. 3 days later, I received a call from the police department. They informed me that they had opened a preliminary investigation based on my complaint, but they were being met with resistance. The authorities had already received word from Karen and her allies in the HOA, and she had tried to convince them that my accusations were baseless. Even more troubling, they said that Karen had implied that if the investigation continued, she would take legal action against the department for harassment. It was clear to me that she was pulling out all the stops to protect herself, and she wasn't about to go down without a fight. The police told me that they were proceeding with caution, not because they didn't believe me, but because of the pressure from Karen. They mentioned that they had received threats and demands from the HOA to shut down the investigation. This was the moment I realized how deep Karen's influence went. She had so many people under her thumb: law enforcement, the HOA board, and even some of the local government officials. She was used to getting her way, and now she was trying to bully the system into protecting her. But I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the authorities the way she had manipulated everyone else. I called my lawyer again and told him we needed to push harder. Karen is trying to use her power to shut this down, but we can't let that happen. We need to make sure the authorities follow through with the investigation. This isn't just about me anymore, it's about everyone she's been exploiting. My lawyer agreed, and we began to take more aggressive steps. We started compiling more evidence not just for the lawsuit, but to ensure that Karen couldn't wiggle her way out of the investigation. We contacted witnesses who had worked directly with Karen and asked them to testify. We also brought in experts to analyze the financial records and determine how much money had been misappropriated from the HOA under her control. Each new piece of evidence we gathered only strengthened our case, and I knew that eventually the truth would come to light. Karen wasn't the only one with power and influence anymore. The more I pushed, the more I realized that there were other people out there who were tired of her manipulations. I wasn't alone in this fight, and the more people saw what she had done, the more they began to speak out. There was no way she could cover up her tracks forever. Every step I took was a calculated move, and I knew that the longer this dragged on, the more damage Karen would do to herself. The pressure was mounting, and soon I was confident that she wouldn't be able to hide behind her power anymore. She had underestimated me, and that was her biggest mistake. The truth would come out, and when it did, Karen would have no one to turn to but herself. The moment had arrived. After everything had built up after the evidence, the letters, the support from the residents, I knew it was time to face Karen publicly. I had enough backing now, enough pressure from the community, and most importantly, I had the truth. The very thing Karen had worked so hard to keep hidden was about to come to light in front of everyone she'd manipulated. I stood at the edge of the community hall, feeling the tension in the air. The dedication ceremony had been moved to the evening for convenience, just before the HOA's annual elections, and Karen was preparing to take full credit for the fountain project. This was supposed to be her shining moment. She had planned every detail from the landscaping to the grand reveal, but what she didn't plan for was the truth catching up to her. I entered the hall, and a murmur of whispers ran through the crowd. Some of the neighbors I had spoken with had already arrived, their faces a mix of curiosity and nervousness. I could sense that they weren't sure what to expect, but they were ready to see Karen exposed for the liar and manipulator she was. Ready to confront the truth that had been buried under a pile of fabricated success stories. Karen stood at the front, speaking into the microphone, trying to keep her composure. Her smile was tight, her posture perfect. She was trying to hold on to the last bit of control she thought she had over this situation. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, her voice carrying across the room. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the progress our community has made. This beautiful fountain is the heart of Meadowbrook Heights, and it's a symbol of the unity we've built together." I couldn't help but watch her with disdain. This woman was standing there presenting a project built on lies and stolen resources, as if it were the epitome of her success. She had convinced everyone that this fountain would bring the neighborhood together, when in reality, it was nothing more than a monument to her own greed and manipulation. The moment was approaching. I stepped forward, interrupting her speech with a calm but firm voice. "That's not the whole story, Karen," I said, letting the words hang in the air for a beat. The room fell silent as every eye turned toward me. This fountain, this so-called community project, is built on lies, and it's time everyone knew the truth. Karen's face immediately froze. I could see the color draining from her cheeks as she quickly tried to regain control. "Caleb, this isn't the time or place for these accusations," she said, her voice shaky. "We're here to celebrate, not cause trouble." I wasn't having it. "Oh, it's the perfect time, Karen. You've been lying to these people for far too long. This fountain wasn't funded by the HOA's budget. It was built with stolen water that comes from my property, without my permission, without my knowledge." Gasps echoed through the crowd as people began to murmur amongst themselves. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time I saw real fear in her expression. "You can deny it all you want," I continued, "but the truth is out. I've got the documents, the contracts, the invoices. You've used your position to push this through, with no regard for the people who trusted you. And now I've made sure everyone knows exactly what you've done." The crowd began to shift uneasily. People were looking at each other, at Karen, at me. Some of the neighbors who had been hesitant to speak out now stood taller. The truth was spreading like wildfire. Karen tried to regain her composure. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice growing louder. "You're making accusations with no evidence. This is nothing but a personal attack." "I've got plenty of evidence," I said, pulling out a folder filled with documentation. "But there's one thing you can't deny: your own involvement. You've been using the HOA funds, your family's business, and my land to build this whole operation. And it stops now." With that, I handed the folder to the nearest reporter. He immediately started flipping through the papers, his eyes widening as he saw the details. He wasn't the only one who was shocked. Karen's face twisted in panic as she realized the truth was out in the open. The room was in chaos now. People were shouting, demanding answers. "How long has this been going on?" one neighbor asked. "Why didn't we know about this?" another said. The once loyal followers of Karen were now questioning her motives. Karen tried to speak again, but her voice was drowned out by the crowd's growing outrage. She stood there helpless as the truth overwhelmed her. The reporters were already documenting everything, capturing the fall of the woman who had once held the community in her grip. The board members who had supported Karen looked uncomfortable, some shifting uncomfortably, realizing the damage she had done to their reputation as well. I stepped back, letting the crowd take over. They had questions now, real questions that Karen couldn't answer. She had no escape. I had exposed the heart of her corruption, and there was no going back for her now. The ceremony was supposed to be her moment of glory. Instead, it was her moment of destruction. As the crowd turned on her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had fought for justice, not just for me, but for everyone she had wronged. Karen had spent years manipulating people, but the truth had a way of catching up with even the most powerful. And now, everyone knew exactly who she was. Finally, the grand opening of the fountain day arrived. Karen had prepared meticulously for this moment. She stood proudly beside the fountain, confident that everything would go smoothly and that everyone would praise her for her community efforts. All the residents, both old and new, were there to witness the event. Journalists and reporters were also present, cameras and microphones pointing toward Karen as if she were a movie star. She was dressed in an elegant outfit, a tight smile on her face as she waved to the crowd, projecting confidence. The scene was perfect for her. Everyone's eyes on her, thinking she was the one responsible for creating something magnificent for the neighborhood. The fountain was spraying shimmering streams of water into the air, reflecting the late afternoon sun, with the surrounding gardens and greenery arranged with precision. Everything was set up just right, from where Karen stood next to the fountain to the lighting timed perfectly. I stood at the edge of the crowd watching Karen with a mocking smile. She had no idea that today would not be her day. Everything she'd worked for was about to come crashing down in front of her. The truth was ready to surface, and I was there to make sure it did. People around me started murmuring, their curiosity piqued, but no longer fearful of Karen. They had begun to realize that things weren't as they seemed. I stepped forward toward Karen. She saw me and smiled warmly, thinking I was there to congratulate her. But her smile quickly faded when I approached. "Congratulations, Karen. Today is your day," I said, my voice calm but full of sarcasm. I looked at her standing proudly next to the fountain, unaware that she was about to be defeated. Karen maintained her composed, self-satisfied expression, but I could see a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Thank you, Caleb. I'm so glad you could be here to witness the success of our community," she replied, her voice smooth, but I could tell she was tense. "Success for the community?" I asked, tilting my head. "Actually, it's a success built on lies and the abuse of power, Karen." Her smile froze for a split second. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm talking about the truth, Karen," I said, standing tall. "This isn't a community achievement. It's a product of manipulation and deceit. You've used my water without my permission, you've stolen resources, and now you're standing here pretending to be the hero." Karen's face drained of color. "You're lying," she spat, her voice trembling. "None of this is true. You're just trying to ruin everything." "Oh, it's all true," I replied, pulling out a folder filled with documents and holding it up in front of her. "Here's the evidence, Karen. The contracts, the fake invoices, the illicit spending. Everything you've done to manipulate the system and control these people." Karen stumbled back, her usual composure slipping as she processed what I had just revealed. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The crowd started to murmur, whispers turning into louder questions. "What is he talking about?" I heard someone ask. "Is this true?" I stood there, watching her face twist in panic. The room was electric with tension, and I could see the shift happening. People were turning away from Karen. The community was starting to wake up to see her for what she truly was. "Karen, you can't keep lying to them," I said, my voice steady and clear. "This day is not about your so-called success. It's about revealing the truth." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. "I've exposed you for what you are," I continued. "A fraud, a liar. And today, the people you've deceived will no longer follow you. You can't manipulate them anymore." The crowd began to react. Some people were staring at Karen, disbelief on their faces. Others were looking at me, nodding in agreement, murmuring their support. For the first time, Karen was no longer in control. The illusion of her power was shattering. Karen tried to speak again, but her voice was drowned out by the growing noise of the crowd. People were asking questions, demanding answers. "Why didn't we know about this? How long has this been going on?" The voices were louder now, and Karen had no defense. Her reputation was crumbling before her eyes. I stepped back, letting the people take control of the situation. They had questions, and they deserved answers. Karen was cornered, unable to manipulate the narrative any longer. The press was capturing every moment, documenting her downfall. The board members who had supported her stood in silence, looking uncomfortable, realizing that their association with Karen was now a liability. The ceremony, which had been meant to showcase her achievements, had turned into the event that exposed her for who she really was. The fountain, once a symbol of her supposed success, had become a symbol of her lies. Karen had been so sure of her triumph, but now she was left standing there exposed alone and defeated. The truth had finally come to light, and there was no turning back. The community was awake, and Karen's power over them was over. The scene had been perfectly set. Karen stood proudly, fully convinced that today would be her day. She pressed the button to open the fountain, and everyone present eagerly awaited the fresh water to shoot up sparkling in the sunlight. What she didn't know was that I had my own plan in motion, one that I had carefully prepared, and now it was time for it to unfold in front of everyone. When Karen pressed the button to start the fountain, instead of clean water rising, a stream of dark, filthy water smelling rancid shot out, spraying across the entire fountain area. The scene immediately descended into chaos. People in the crowd started to panic, shouting as the dirty water hit them, and those filming couldn't believe what their eyes were seeing. The foul stench of the water filled the air, making it unbearable. The beautiful scene that Karen thought would be her crowning achievement had turned into an utter disaster beyond repair. Karen froze, her face draining of color. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. The dirty water sprayed all over her, ruining the elegant dress she had chosen for the event. The crowd started murmuring, and the people around began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Karen fumbled with the controls, trying to stop the fountain, but nothing worked. The situation had spiraled completely out of her control. As the chaos unfolded, I stepped forward, moving through the crowd, and raised the documents I had gathered to expose Karen's deceit. "This is the truth, Karen," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the noise. "You haven't just deceived me. You've deceived this entire community. You've used your power in the HOA to illegally profit. You've stolen my water and manipulated the people here for your own gain." I began presenting the evidence: contracts, forged invoices, proof of the illegal water system that had been put in place without my consent. Every document I showed was a punch in the face of the false narrative Karen had created. Each piece of evidence revealed the full extent of her manipulation. At that moment, Karen staggered back, her composure cracking. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The crowd started to whisper, questions rising. "What's he talking about? Is this true?" The murmurs grew louder, and Karen's usual confident demeanor was slipping away. "Karen, you can't keep lying to them," I continued, my voice calm and clear. "This isn't your success. This is the result of manipulation and lies. You've been using my property, my water, and now you're standing here pretending to be a hero." Karen's face turned pale. "You're lying," she shouted, but it was clear the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. "None of this is true. You're just trying to ruin everything." "Oh, it's all true," I replied, pulling out more documents and holding them up. "I've got the contracts, the invoices, the financial records, everything. You've been using the HOA funds, your family's company, and my land to build your little empire. And now, everyone will know the truth." Karen stumbled back, completely rattled. The crowd was turning their loyalty, shifting from her to me. They had seen the truth for themselves. No longer were they afraid of her. They were ready to confront her. "Karen, you've been exposed," I said, "and now everyone knows who you really are." With that, the crowd erupted in anger. People began to shout at Karen, demanding answers. The reporters were documenting everything, and I knew this moment would spread far beyond this room. Karen was no longer in control. Her reputation built on lies was falling apart. Karen tried to speak again, but her words were drowned out by the overwhelming noise of the crowd. She had no way of escaping the truth. The damage had been done. The community could see her for what she really was, and there was no turning back. The fountain, which she had hoped would be her crowning achievement, had become the symbol of her downfall. The dirty water was a metaphor for everything she had done, and as the chaos unfolded around her, Karen was left standing, exposed and powerless. As everything unraveled, Karen began to panic. She rushed back and forth in the crowd, trying to control the situation, but the truth had already been exposed. Her excuses couldn't convince anyone anymore. "This is a misunderstanding," Karen desperately shouted, her voice shaky. "It's just a technical malfunction, that's all." But no one was buying it. Everyone had seen the dirty water shooting out of the fountain along with the evidence I presented. The residents began shouting, demanding an explanation. "You've been lying to us all this time?" one person yelled. "Why did you do this?" another added, anger rising in their voice. The questions kept coming, and Karen was left with no answers. She staggered back, her usual composure slipping. Her mouth opened and closed, but she couldn't find the words. The crowd was now turning on her. The loyalty she once had from the people around her was gone. They were starting to see her for who she truly was. "Karen, you've deceived all of us," one resident called out, disappointment heavy in their tone. "We trusted you, and you took advantage of us. You used your power to manipulate everyone in this community." Those words were like a slap in the face to Karen, and she had no way to defend herself. The tension in the air was palpable. Some of the residents stood up, not just demanding an explanation, but calling for her to take responsibility for her actions. "You need to pay us back," one person shouted. "We're suing you." The voices of anger and frustration were becoming louder, and Karen could do nothing to stop it. Karen backed away, her eyes wide with panic. She was grasping at straws, trying to regain control, but it was too late. "You don't understand. I did all of this for the community," she muttered, but her words had no weight. No one was listening to her anymore. Her facade was crumbling, and there was no way to stop it. Karen turned to look at the fountain, her head lowered, as if she were searching for some way to escape the reality of the situation. She shook her head, refusing to acknowledge the truth. "You're all wrong," she said, but it was clear no one believed her. The residents were now seeing her for what she was, nothing more than a con artist. The reporters were filming every moment, capturing her downfall for everyone to see. Karen's attempts to save face were futile. The evidence I had shown, the documents that exposed her corruption, were irrefutable. There was no escaping it now. Karen turned to look at me, desperation in her eyes. "Caleb first. I was wrong," she stammered, her voice trembling. "But I can fix this. Let me explain." But her words fell flat. No amount of explaining could undo what had been done. No matter what she said, now the truth had already come out. The residents began to move closer, their anger growing. They had been deceived, and now they were demanding accountability. A few people stepped forward, calling for her resignation from the HOA. The community had woken up, and Karen had nowhere to hide. In the end, Karen was left speechless. Her career, the trust she had built over the years, everything she had worked for had collapsed. She stood there alone, no one by her side, facing the people she had manipulated and lied to. I looked at Karen, not feeling any sense of triumph, but simply a recognition that what had to happen had happened. She had gotten what she deserved. As the truth about Karen's manipulation unraveled, the entire community started to break free from the grip she had held on them for so long. The sense of relief was palpable. People who had been too afraid to speak out against her before now came forward, expressing their gratitude for what I had done. They felt like they had been saved from a massive deception that had controlled their lives for years. Neighbors who had once stayed silent, either out of fear or loyalty, began to realize just how deeply they had been misled. Apologies flowed from those who had supported Karen, acknowledging their mistake in blindly following her. Many of them regretted not noticing the red flags sooner, but now they were determined to make things right. For me, this moment of collective awakening was deeply fulfilling. The weight of knowing I had helped open their eyes and set them free from Karen's corruption was a relief. It was not just about me anymore, it was about the entire community reclaiming their voice and power. There was an overwhelming sense of unity. As people expressed their thanks, I knew the real victory wasn't in defeating Karen, but in helping the neighborhood rediscover their strength and confidence. Seeing the residents take a stand against corruption made every hardship worth it. It was a quiet but profound peace that I felt, knowing I had played a part in bringing about this change. As the truth came to light, Karen faced the legal consequences of her actions. The authorities launched a full investigation into her, charging her with corruption, fraud, and the illegal abuse of power. It wasn't long before she was required to pay back the money she had embezzled from the HOA and the residents. The financial damage she had caused was substantial, and Karen's actions were deemed criminal. She would not only face financial restitution, but also the potential for legal penalties, including jail time. Meanwhile, the HOA, in an effort to recover from the damage Karen's leadership had caused, began to implement sweeping reforms. They established clearer, more transparent guidelines to prevent future misuse of power. The new policies aimed to protect the rights and interests of the residents, ensuring that something like this could never happen again. The board members who had been complicit in Karen's actions were also held accountable, with many stepping down to restore the HOA's integrity. It was clear that the changes were necessary. And though it couldn't undo the damage done, the reforms were a step toward rebuilding trust and ensuring a fairer, more transparent system for the community moving forward. After everything had unfolded, I returned to the piece of my land where I had always fought to protect my family's legacy. The fields, the lake, the very soil that had been passed down through generations, everything felt right again. The weight of the battle had lifted, and with it came a sense of calm. I had stood my ground and fought not just for myself, but for the entire community. It was a victory that felt both personal and collective. the community slowly began to heal. The residents, no longer under Karen's control, started to rebuild trust in each other. They took ownership of their neighborhood once more, ensuring that the abuses of the past would not be repeated. There was a renewed sense of unity as everyone worked together to restore the integrity of their community. As I watched the changes take place, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Justice had been served, and Karen's deception had been fully exposed. The weight of her manipulation had been lifted from the shoulders of the people who had been deceived, and I knew that in the end, the right thing had been done. For me, the most rewarding part was knowing that I had played a role in ensuring that the truth prevailed. My family's values, my land, and the community had all emerged stronger, and that was a comfort I would carry with me for a long time. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. It was the process, the law, that made the difference. If I had let anger guide my actions, things would have gone very differently. I could have resorted to something rash, something illegal, but that would have only hurt the cause. Instead, I followed the proper channels, gathering evidence, building my case, and letting the legal system do its job. That's what brought about the real change, not the heat of the moment. Standing up for what's right doesn't always mean getting angry or taking things into your own hands. It's about following the rules, using the law as a tool to protect your rights. Evidence, proper documentation, and legal processes outweigh any emotional reaction. It's easy to let frustration drive you, but it's more effective to rely on what's right, legal, and just. To anyone watching, remember that it's not just about fighting back. It's about knowing how to fight back in a way that truly matters. Keep your records, check public filings, and know when to involve legal authorities. It's less about big gestures and more about understanding the system. Communities stay strong when their people respect the law. When authority goes unchecked, it can easily be abused. And as I stand by the lake where my family has lived for generations, I realize that it's not just the land that needs protection, it's the integrity of the entire community.